without further ado, we are going to have our featured keynote speakers, starting with Yanna Lambrinidou.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to stand back here. I'm working on being more of a Roman speaker, but I'm not just there yet. And I was thinking my consolation now is that, you know, in yoga, there's such a thing as, I don't know if any of you are familiar, there's such a thing as drishti. It's called, it's a point that you focus your eyes on when you really want to be balanced. And so I thought the rest of the speakers are all really good at being roaming, and I thought maybe I'm going to be your drishti. I'm just going to stand here for the next 10 minutes. So it's really an honor to be here today as part of this very exciting Pathways initiative. And before I start, I wanted to hand out just a sheet, I think, Shelly, your hand. Oh, thank you so much. And it has some hopefully useful information and a brief bio statement. I know I'm not familiar with many of you, and I know you are not familiar with me. My plan is to spend the next few minutes sharing with you some insights from my own experience teaching engineering ethics. It's something that I have truly loved doing. It's changed my life in many ways, and I think it's changed many of my students' lives too. And through this, I hope to support your thinking about ethics integration in your fields. And I know that some of you are already incorporating ethics into your courses. And even though I hope that the few points I'm going to make are still going to be useful, obviously take them or leave them as you see fit. So I wanted to start with a hopefully reassuring thought. That whether we intend it or not, we teach ethics, I think, when we teach almost any subject at all. And that's because the messages we send about what types of knowledge count, or what questions and concerns deserve priority, or what research approaches are valid, all these and many other messages have moral implications. The Pathways integration of ethics can be viewed really as an opportunity to make more conscious and intentional, or to advance the ethics instruction that you already offer. I shared with you on this sheet, the handout, is a quote from philosopher Margaret Urban Walker. And it's really a reminder that there is room for many disciplinary perspectives in the exploration and teaching of ethics. Briefly, let me share that my background is in medical anthropology, and I was led to ethics first by my ethnographic research in end-of-life care and pediatric cancer care, which allowed me to listen to diverse voices of families, patients, and their healthcare providers, and certainly the needs and knowledges, experiences of dependence on professionals, and the moral worldviews of patients who were the focus of my research. And the second thing that led me to ethics was my multi-year and ongoing research and advocacy in the Washington, D.C. area on Washington, D.C.'s historic lead in drinking water crisis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this event. For those of you who are not, the D.C. crisis involved a 2.5 year cover-up of lead in water levels that exceeded the EPA standard hundreds and even thousands of times. The problem was initially discovered by residents and then later exposed by the Washington Post. And subsequently, 2 fraudulent studies that were government-sponsored stated that, claimed that nobody was harmed. Today, thanks to the tireless work of affected families, of public health advocates in Washington, D.C., and scientists like my colleague Mark Edwards here in environmental engineering, it has been established that, in fact, hundreds, if not thousands, of D.C. children were lead poisoned from the contamination, and that fetal deaths spiked during the period of the high lead levels. The many experts involved in this fiasco came from multiple professional fields and worked in both local and federal government agencies. Against this backdrop, we see professional ethics as, at least in part, about the use and misuse of the power of experts to affect the lives of diverse and sometimes vulnerable and unseen publics. This premise captures a fundamental complexity that I think is often overlooked, and that is that the point at which experts' decisions and products and practices touch society is effectively the point at which experts' own priorities, perspectives, and moralities interact with and can elevate or undermine the priorities, perspectives, and moralities of diverse publics. Cases like DC's and many others frequently in the news, here on this slide are some examples of cases involving medical researchers, teachers, lawyers, illustrate that identifying ethical issues in their complex contexts, as per the pathways ethical reasoning outcome, requires of us to be aware of what is locally at stake in each situation. In other words, we must learn to we must seek to learn what stakeholder needs and moralities are on the ground, and which stakeholders might be the most vulnerable to silencing and to harm. And why is this important? Because as British philosopher Miranda Fricker reminds us, the very position of being an expert comes with a type of social power that, quote, tends to obscure certain paths of reality, unquote. Fricker asserts that if we want to achieve a full understanding of a human practice, social phenomenon, or pattern of relationships, then we must take up the point of view of those on the losing end. Political philosopher Bob Gooding echoes Fricker's point by making the case that we are responsible for protecting those whose vital interests are particularly vulnerable to our actions and choices. Some vulnerabilities, and hence the responsibilities growing out of them, are natural, inevitable, and immutable. Others are created, shaped, or sustained by current social arrangements. While we should always strive to protect the vulnerable, we should also strive to reduce the latter sort of vulnerabilities insofar as they render the vulnerable liable to exploitation. Reinforcing both Fricker's and Gooding's message, real-world cases, as well as research in sociology, social psychology, and business ethics, demonstrate that when professionals are disengaged from the people that they affect, they're more vulnerable to overlooking locally, morally, and technically relevant perspectives, making inappropriate decisions, and causing unintended harm. My colleague, Mark Edwards, and I teach ethics with the intent to cultivate in students a moral attitude of attention to publics that they might one day affect, and to support them to begin thinking about the personal and professional standards that they might want to set for themselves as to what kinds of professionals they're willing and not willing to become. By foregrounding diverse stakeholder voices, and these are some of the stakeholders from the Washington, D.C. case, we're able to show the significant and extensive impacts that professional expertise can have on multiple people and groups. And we're also able to illustrate that moral reasoning is a human practice available to all, situated in time and social space, and informed by social and cultural differences. Our goal is to teach students that recognition of moral problems and the ability to exercise their moral agency require more than expertise in their specific field, namely awareness about their professional power, understanding of their professional responsibilities to diverse publics, and especially to the most vulnerable, and preparedness to learn what needs and moralities are locally at stake in every case. And then last but not least, moral imagination and moral courage. Our course is an ethics course. It's focused, dedicated to ethics, so it allows us to incorporate numerous projects for moral introspection and listening. This is a quick list of some of the projects that we have incorporated. And if you'd like any more information, I'm more than happy to share. Through engaged and contextualized knowing, we believe that students are in a better position to make assessments about what, in any given case, would constitute morally sound professional action, and what types of preparatory steps they need to take in order to be able to carry out such action. In closing, I think that there's a limitless number of paths to engage students in contextualized ethics instruction. One thing I've observed is that when students see links between the material that they're taught in class and then ordinary people outside the classroom and outside their own social sphere, they begin to recognize the relevance of their education and they get excited. And that's a very rewarding moment, I think, for all of us. In your handout, there's an excerpt from a student's blog that captures the impact on him that this one engagement activity had, where he got to listen directly to hear the stories of the very people he had been reading about. It was a very different experience, and this is what he describes. One good first step, I think, for ethics integration might be to identify a complex or controversial issue in your field that you yourself find important and exciting. A second step could be to introduce students to the case through multiple perspectives, coverage in print media, video, radio, social media, having guest speakers who are involved in the case, and to make sure that somehow silenced and marginalized groups are included. Here you want to encourage students, and that's what we do, is not to judge, evaluate, or draw conclusions before they have the facts and before they hear people's perspectives, but to simply listen for the rationale behind each perspective. Perhaps the most important lesson our students learn, I think, is that asking questions is a crucial ingredient for deciding what moral path to take when you're a professional. Third, students could work on identifying key stakeholders and figuring out which among them might be the most and least vulnerable. And lastly, a creative hands-on project could give students an opportunity to grapple with the issue's key moral dimensions and to think through what types of actions might constitute morally sound professional conduct. If you want to talk more about this approach, of course, please let me know. But again, I'm sure that there's many other approaches. This is just one. I'll be around, of course, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentations and talking with everybody about your thoughts and approaches. Thank you.